Hi everyone. I'm not a giant, but I have experience. And I came here with Austin, the other great Austin in the room. And we traveled to the Seychelles in 2015 and were part of a training program in large-scale coral restoration organized by the NGO Nature Seychelles. And in 2016, we became project coordinator for this project. So this presentation is about our story there from 2016, fighting for the survival of a restored reef in the Seychelles. So I will start with sharing with you the results of our monitoring study during the 2016 event. And then I will talk about the target management actions we took after the bleaching to promote the recovery of the site and the area. From the propagation of supercorals, the control of invasive coral-eating species, and the identification of reefs of hope. So in January 2016, we were given the task to manage this reef in the Seychelles inner islands that was within the NPA of Cousin Island Special Reserve. Since '98, Cousin has been managed by Niño Seychelles, and this NGO is a partner of BirdLife International. So this was no ordinary reef. In 2010, Niño Seychelles started the initiative to bring it back to life after it was lethally bleached by the '98 El Niño and further degraded to the state of rubble by the 2004 tsunami. Funded by the USA, this project achieved the restoration of the reef, the area of a football field, by successfully transplanting 24,000 nursery-grown corals and reaching a biodiversity of 34 coral species, with 90% of which being Acropora and Pocillopora species common to the area and considered pioneers to settle and colonize on the reef. And so the objective of the project was really to reset the foundations of a healthy reef and recreate this attraction hub for natural recruitment, and eventually reestablish the goods and services intrinsic to these ecosystems, like fisheries, which is pretty much the only thing that matters for locals in the Seychelles, justifying an MBA. So this was achieved by applying the three-step garden concept, harvesting coral fragments from large coral colonies from donor sites, putting them on nurseries for up to 18 months for growth, and finally transplanting them onto a selected degraded site. So as many island nations, Seychelles really has a vital dependence to its coral reef. It has an economy based on fishing and tourism. This is in front of our office in 2017, where the barrier reef is heavily eroded, not recovering, very porous. And so the coast has been eroding dramatically since '98. So this is a common scene over there now. So I'll get to the thick of it. So in October 2015, the first warnings we got of the global bleaching turning global was in October 2015, published by NOAA. Meanwhile, in the Seychelles, fish were dying and corals were bleaching already due to an harmful algal bloom in October. And so our transplanted sites went pretty well during this HAB, but we did lose some corals on our healthy control site. So as heartbreaking as this bleaching was a very good opportunity for us to put our reef to test and demonstrate the project's concept, which is propagating coral survivors and survivors of past bleaching events can increase the resilience of coral reefs to future bleaching events. So as every good impact monitoring, we wanted to have it before and after impact data. So we started the bleaching monitoring in February, before any signs of bleaching, and performed it on the restored site, on the healthy control site, using point intersect transect method, averaging 54 transects monthly, and that happened during 7 months. So the first symptoms of the reef appeared on the restored site on the recruits, and by March the reef was seriously starting to pale. By April, sea surface temperature average reached a peak and widespread mortality, widespread bleaching happened within 15 days. The highest temperature recorded on the restored site was at 12 meters depth, and that was 31.6 degrees. So by May, we had 80% of our restored sites bleached, and fish had also left the show. And by June, the temperature cooled, but we kept the monitoring going until August to follow whether the reef had recovered or not. And this is the result. This is a comparative study of the bleaching response between the restored site and the healthy control site. Shading intensity represents progressive coral bleaching conditions from no bleaching and lightest gray to bleached in gray to dead in darkest gray. And the black line is the sea surface temperature monthly averages. So the analysis reveals strong difference between the transition and impact of coral bleaching at each site. The healthy control site shows early mortality before even showing bleaching, and that is probably due to the HAB. The bleaching increased on both sites in April and reached a maximum in May. Mortality continued to progressively rise in the control site, but remained low on the restored site, so we were very hopeful, until July, when it suddenly boomed. By August, mortality was dominant on both sites. So why did our supercorals die? Maybe they were not supercorals. The fragments were collected from large colonies in 2010, which is 12 years after the 9-year bleaching. So it's hard to know for sure they were survivors of the event. The heat stress in the Seychelles was more intense and longer than ever, true. And the reef health was also affected already by the 2015 HAB. But we think our corals died due to a combination of all these reasons, but we can talk about it. So we also observed widespread mortality on the donor side. And what we also saw during the dives were a large amount of fragments of opportunity and dislodged colonies that were still alive post-bleaching. So this leads me to our first target management action, which is the propagation of heat-tolerant coral material. And this was also an opportunity to minimize the harvesting impact on the donor side. So our collection efforts generated over 2,100 fragments. The stock biodiversity reached 8 species of Acropora and Pocillopora, whatever we could find on the site. And scarring and sheeting happened within a few weeks for all species. The ecosystem soon became a floating ecosystem. Sorry, the nursery became a floating ecosystem with 12 species of resident reef fish and occasional iconic species like the endangered humpback parrotfish. And it was quite cool to see that the project had achieved that before we even transplanted our corals. The only problem though was they also had snacks on the corals we had tagged for growth monitoring. But they did leave us a few, so I can show you our annual growth rate on the nursery, with Pocillopora showing really good growth rate, really good survival, and these two fragments increased their initial size by 522% and 819% in 12 months. We did have some early problems on the Acropora fragments that were not coping well with nursery conditions, but we now discuss with Austin, and we know the reason why. We did, though, undertake an early transplantation of these fragments back to our restored site. So in March 2017, we transplanted 547 Acropora Laing-Herbert and 260 Acropora formosa, and they did much better once transplanted. They've grown a lot. And as we were at it, we also noticed a lot of small, young branching colonies growing on loose rubble next to this site. And we did collect some, and we left a few as well. We collected 140 of those and transplanted them directly back onto the restored site by just cementing the piece of rock they were growing on to the substrate. So this technique was very successful. After 12 months of growth, we could finally transplant our Pocillopora corals to our restored site, and we undertook this at a rate of about 30 corals per diver, and most of the time it was just Austin and I. There you go, this is a happy Pocillopora varicose at 24 hours after transplantation. You can see the points of cement to the substrate, connecting the coral to the substrate. And within a couple of months, the coral tissue grows over the cement, and the coral starts taking its natural tree-like shape. So 1 year after the bleaching event, we were happy to see 2,000 corals that were back on the restored site, and recovery was on its way again, and more have been planted since then. Since the start of the project in 2010, there's been many monitorings performed on the site about a recovery of fish populations, benthic populations, and monitoring rates. And the point was to show that planting corals on a reef, on a barren reef, attracts baby corals. And it's been proven before, and we kept monitoring after the bleaching event. After we lost some colonies, the site was still showing increased signs of recruitment and settlement. So it suggests that the reef was still playing its role as an attraction for baby corals, and that was very positive for us. Last interesting point about this, that our newly transplanted corals were targeted by parrotfish, whereas resident corals were being untouched, and so maybe our nursery conditions might have given our corals a different smell or a different chemical cue or a different color that the parrotfish could easily target. But this stopped after a couple of weeks, so they did adapt and they did scour. And this parrotfish predation was actually a good attachment test for us, because if our corals made it through that, we knew that we did a good job cementing them. So this wasn't a big concern for us. A bigger concern for us was another type, a smaller kind of coral-eating species that we had to tackle after the bleaching event. Because a couple months post-bleaching, we dove the site and saw that the survivors were now being infested with Drupella. And so I literally went, what? in my ribs, not believing that all this work we had done, little snails were finishing the last survivors. But this is basically what happens when an ecosystem shifts out of balance, everything kind of goes to hell. But we did collect about 2,000 of those guys with tweezers, just, you know, desperately trying to save our sites. And as you would expect it, the same happened on the donor sites. But collection dives for Drupella being very time-consuming and not easy to undertake on this site exposed to swell, we decided to salvage the infested corals, the infested coral tissue that was still alive, like on this colony, place it on the nursery to increase our stock of heat-tolerant coral material. So this added a further 1,600 supercorals to the nursery, and 10% of those would be planted back onto the donor sites. Our total stock reached 3,750 heat-resistant corals, showing fast growth and 99% survival rate on the nursery. That is excluding the Acropora we transplanted earlier. In October 2017, we had the opportunity to implement similar project for a five-star resort in the Seychelles. And so we built a nursery for them and placed about 2,000 coral fragments within the MPA close to the resort. And these fragments were taken from colonies that were experiencing exactly the same thing. Survivors of bleaching events, but invaded by Drupella. And I think it's worth saving this material, propagating it. Finally, a crucial activity for us was to explore and identify resilient sites that would replenish degraded areas and be potential candidates as future donor sites. Trompeuse Reef, located a few kilometers southwest of Cousin, is one of those sites displaying many large live colonies of branching, mounding, encrusting species, and tablet as well. Further monitoring is needed on the site to determine whether the resilience is due to oceanographic features, topographic features. One thing though, we had to work on this site. We were on the staff, had no time, but we did cull some cuts from the site that the site was storing high numbers of crabs and starfish, so we managed to lethally inject 217 with vinegar to keep the population at check until full recovery. So my take-home message today is that coral restoration goes way beyond planting corals. It also involves keeping the dynamics of the reef at check. And after this experience, we were able to address reef recovery with an adapted strategy to bleaching in the context of restoration within an MPA. Among other things, we recommend target management in the year post-bleaching, propagate supercorals, and control your predators. Until natural recovery, you can increase coral cover on your reef by refragmenting part of your nursery and assist natural recruitment. We have experience, and we're back in Australia, full of energy and experience to share. Thank you very much.